Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with 𝘄cie𝗂𝗹𝗲, brought to you by Botanica Candles and More, where only the strongest roots see the light. And if you haven't had the opportunity, please go ahead and tap on that subscribe button. Exciting episode today on the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲, and the woman that we're going to be interviewing has quite a backstory, and apart from that is a daughter of this Orisha. Please join me in welcoming medium Kayla.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Kayla, it's a pleasure to see you, especially, after having seen you last week as you were going through your initiation process, which it was a pleasure to initiate you. This Orisha is one that we've been wanting to come out with information on for quite some time, right? Just because, in my opinion, Oya is the most complex female Orisha. You know, we recently did a episode on 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗲, and I gave that title to him from a masculine standpoint. But when we look at the Orisha Oya, she has to do with so much, right? The cemetery, right? A huge link to ancestor worship in the Orisha 𝗃𝗶𝗃, of whom she is the mother. Then apart from that, we also have her as the supermarket deity, right? She has to do with the marketplace and, the feminine role within it. She has to do with lightning, right?
Yes.
She is Shango's counterpart in that regard. Wind and a slew of other things, right? So I have to ask you, when was the first time you heard about this Orisha?
Well, I was told actually by a previous godparent who is now deceased, and that's what led me to you because, of course, things get lost when our elders pass and nothing gets passed down.
Sure.
And most recently, I was actually almost struck by lightning.
Wow.
And I was not paying attention to some things that I should have been paying attention to, and she went drastic to get my attention back. And from there, it's been about a year since, and it's led me to you.
She's really intense. Like, Oya is, when you hear about any of her stories, just any of her interactions, she doesn't seem to know a middle ground. And I guess we don't want her to either, because she wouldn't be as exciting if she knew the middle path.
Right.
But when we look at the Odu of 𝘃𝗶𝗃𝗃, which is where Oya was actually born and where she came down from heaven, this has been her story from the very beginning. She came down in the form of a tornado, another thing that she's associated with. And when she came down spitting hellfire, all the other Orishas were pretty much terrified of her because they're like, who's this young woman that's just terrorizing all of nature? Where 𝗃𝗶𝗃𝗃 quickly recognized that there needed to be an intervention, of which all of the Orishas participated in, helped her go through her initiation process, become spiritually aligned, thus leading to her stability and being able to grow within her position and becoming so popular. It was a success, to where she has followers till this day. And the thing about Oya is the children of Oya, especially in Africa, they're vehemently loyal to their Orisha. They love Oya. There's whole lineages, whole families over there that just dedicate themselves to this one energy. So I have to ask you, being her daughter, can you resonate with any of that, as you're going through your adolescence or even, in your adulthood, whether it's socially or whether it's spiritually? What was that journey like, finding yourself with all of the gifts that you have?
Oh, well, I grew up in a Pentecostal church.
Oh, wow.
So I was a preacher's kid.
Wow.
And so if anybody knows anything about Pentecost, they channel spirit.
Wow.
So from a young age, it started that way. And then from there, I had a couple close brushes with death and then realized that I could see and speak to the dead.
Wow. So, when we give you the title of medium, I'd love it if you went in a little bit into your background as far as how do we come to that conclusion of mediumship? What has been like your trajectory within that practice?
Well, it first started off when I was a child. Of course, I almost died of when back in the 80s and 90s when all the kids had the tonsillitis and things like that. I got really sick with pneumonia.
Wow.
Almost died after that with that close brush of death. That's when things started to come down. So then I realized that speaking to the dead was part of it. And of course, the religion that I grew up with first before I had come into contact with Ifa, it was evil. So they had me believing that what I could do and how I naturally was evil. So I would tell people things when I needed to or when it was prominent to the point where I couldn't ignore the spirit that was trying to speak to me. from there, a couple years had passed, and I started training in 𝘃𝗵𝗃𝗃.
Very famous place.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't had the opportunity or pleasure to go, but could you educate those that aren't familiar with what or where 𝘃𝗵𝗃𝗃, Florida is? What is that?
Well, 𝘃𝗵𝗃𝗃, Florida is basically like where the snowbird mediums will live. It's a town or a community that is full of spiritualists. And you go through some vigorous training with your elders to make sure that you are what you say you are.
Sure.
And this also has a branch in New York. It's called Lilydale.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. So there's a whole other branch.
So you actually go through like a PhD type dissertation thing where I would imagine there's a panel or a column and you're basically, put to the test, right?
Elders, very similar to probably the training that you go through. You have to go through so much, you have to endure so much and prove your talent.
Yeah, your preparation, right, before
Mm-hmm.
you start practicing. And you said you've been interacting with that specific place for 30 years?
Yes, I go in and out. I have my own practice now that I do, but if I ever have to go back, I do have that option. But of course, a lot of elderly people live there. Some of the older mediums, they're a little
Wow.
bit more settled down. They're not as vigorous as the young, how we move quickly.
I can't blame them because I'm very thankful that I don't have the capability of coming into trance, at least with spirit, because seeing my wife, who has quite a tenure in mediumship as well, seeing what she goes through when, said spirit comes through her body, it's nothing short of painful in my opinion, especially not so much the entrance as much as the exit, kind of that separation. So I really commend you guys. And it really is, it does sound similar to our process because apart from being able to interact with elders to be able to get your licensure or recognition, you always have that opportunity to kind of come back home and be able to, discuss and get opinions on said situations. Because we as spiritual professionals, sometimes you get a case where it's like, what do I do here? Even with all your preparation, it's always nice to be able to go to those elders, people with, such a long tenure to be like, hey, have you ever seen anything like this? How would you react to this, But in the 𝘃𝗶𝗹𝗁, and the 𝘃𝗶𝗹𝗁 speaks very heavily of 𝗃𝗏 because it's the number 9. It speaks of when 𝗃𝗏 actually birthed the Orisha Egungun. I want to really touch on this because the children of 𝗃𝗏 within our practice of Ifa and Orisha, they're really in a gold standard when it comes to mediumship, whether it's the same symptoms you've mentioned of, I see people, I'm hearing dead people, I'm a little frustrated, I don't know how to interact. It makes perfect sense because she actually is the mother of the Orisha that has to do with all of the deceased ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what was, as a child, kind of delving a little more into that, what were your parents saying? What was kind of that reaction, especially coming from that background of Pentecostal? What was that like when you first started showing that?
Well, luckily, I had very supportive family. They somewhat ignored the medium side of things, but in the same token, we had certain gifts as far as foresight, healing, or some people would consider it fortune telling. And that was not ignored. That was actually nurtured. So I feel that the claircognizance, sentience, audience, all of our good clairs that we get as psychics still develop despite me not having a enriched childhood on mediumship.
Wow. Yeah, I could only imagine, especially, it's because I was raised in the Catholic Church to a certain degree, at least by birth, it can be a little confusing at times because, you're being told that this doesn't exist or we're, proliferating this scripture during the day. And then in the evening, either you're going through said symptoms or in my case, there was practice going on where it'll leave you completely confused.
Of course.
So that makes perfect sense. 𝗃𝗏, really interesting personality, right? If we look at the 𝗃𝗶𝗹𝗁, 𝗃𝗏 was actually very involved in like all of the initiations of Orisha. She was very present. She had a lot of gifts. She had a lot of talent, but she would become easily frustrated with those that were around her. Not that much of a surprise. But it got to the point where the other Orishas literally had to restrain her to be able to incorporate her. So I ask you, as you've gone through your mediumship process or even your self-awakening, right? Has it been a struggle for you to even get these things under control? You know, a 30-year career of mediumship, you know, how difficult was it, or how long did it take before you got to a point where it's like, okay, I know how to interact with myself now?
One of the things that is frustrating is part of your knowing, but sometimes that knowing comes with, I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to know, kind of like a feeling of dread. Say you're getting a feeling of dread. For example, several years ago, about a month went by, I was feeling this feeling, something bad's going to happen, something bad's going to happen. My husband got in a car accident, was hit by a drunk driver. Of course, he survived.
Thank God.
But it's one of those things where I wished I would have seen it. But at the same token, I feel like Spirit, or maybe our guides, don't want us to know that, because if I would have told him that, maybe he wouldn't have got back in the car at all. You would change somebody's path. So it gets a little frustrating at times when you're like, I know something's there, or I should know something because I always know it. Why am I being blocked this time? Or where your direction is supposed to go, because like you being a 𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗶, people come to you for guidance. And if somebody comes to me for some kind of guidance and I can't give that to them, that leaves me very frustrated with myself.
No, and I have to relate with you there, because in my brief time of being a medium, even though I never came into trance, it's always that feeling of almost, like you're almost grasping, you know, you're never going to be, it's kind of like the squiggly thing in the eye,
Yes.
You know, and I came to the theory of, or conclusion of, it's because it's the butterfly effect. Sometimes we're not allowed to know because we could change or alter a state of existence. You know, one butterfly, you know, flapping its wings in Africa could cause a hurricane over here. So
Right.
I believe destiny is the same way. And it happens to us as well. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, all we're doing is interpreting, you know, whether you're a medium or whether you're here. Because let's say you're in a spiritual mass and all of a sudden in your mind you see a butterfly, you know, flapping its wings. What does that mean to you? You know, that's really what it comes down to. And at the end of the day, it is interpretation. And I've unfortunately even had cases where I've consulted people and, you know, people have, you know, passed away the next day.
Of course.
And it's a really solemn feeling, because it's like, it's that reminder you're not God. It's the reminder of sometimes said person needed a message. So, you know, I completely relate. And we as 𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗶s, we go through it too, because this is not only a science, it's an art, you know, and it's trying to find that medium ground. Going back to the 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁, 𝗀𝗲 was always helping people. She was really about servitude. When she really found out her gifts and how powerful they were, she wanted to help people. And what happened was the Orisha 𝗀𝗲𝗍 in the 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁, he had gotten into some trouble. You know, he was raising hell, and people got to the point where they're like, we really want to kill this guy, because he was huge, he was imposing, he was a little bit arrogant, and he didn't do a good job of making friends. So they started chasing him down, kind of like the ogre type thing, like Shrek. And they were getting closer and closer, and 𝗀𝗲𝗍 ran into 𝗀𝗲 in the forest because she was there a lot. She needed it to kind of have her space to be able to get away. So when they interacted, 𝗀𝗲 said, what's going on with you? And he said, well, I've made some mistakes, and, you know, these people are tired of my nonsense, and they're going to eliminate me now. Where 𝗀𝗲, feeling sorry for 𝗀𝗀𝗍, knowing he wasn't a bad guy, gave him her skirt, or at least the skirt that goes on top, the one that has the 9 cloths, right? It's a really indicative piece of clothing within our culture, because each cloth or each color represented a different spirit, or 𝗀𝗍, that walked with 𝗀𝗲. By way of putting on this dress and running in opposite directions, 𝗀𝗀𝗍 was able to escape. And when they ran into 𝗀𝗲 thinking she was 𝗀𝗀𝗍, they were like, this is a woman. But ironically, she grows a beard whenever she wants, right? So she's known as the bearded woman. You know, she was just that masculine. So the reason I bring up this 𝗃𝗏𝗃 is because I ask you, throughout your career, have you found yourself in that state of servitude or even salvation for people?
Yes, I have. And sometimes it gets me into a little more trouble than...
Yeah, trouble that wasn't yours, that you've inherited.
Yes, exactly. And figuring things out, though, has been somewhat of a talent of mine. And as I said previously, luckily I had a good support system. So I did have the wisdom of other spiritual leaders, despite them not believing in 𝗃𝗏. But, you know, wisdom is wisdom.
Absolutely. And that's the beautiful thing about spiritism. It is the spirituality or religion of man and woman. It is that really the truth being expressed in the most plainest of ways. And that's what I always enjoyed about the spiritual aspect of things. It's very direct. It doesn't need necessarily a method or a system. It just relates. So perfect. 𝗀𝗏 as well had quite a tumultuous love life. And the guy that it really focuses around is a gentleman named Shango, right? He is the ladies' man, and 𝗀𝗏 was really very infatuated with him, right? And as you look at the different stories and interactions, it was nothing short of toxic. They would go to war, they'd make peace, and there's 𝗀𝗏 has a lot of daughters, right? And you being one of them, not to go into too much specifics, but you speak a lot about your husband and the fabulous man that he is. What was it like getting to the point of romantic stability within your life, being a daughter of 𝗀𝗏? Because it can be tumultuous, at least as a reflection of your mother.
Well, it was kind of a rough road. I've known my husband since high school.
Nice.
But to make a long story short, as he walked in, I told my friend I was going to marry him one day.
Wow.
I didn't know it was going to be 20 years after graduation.
Wow.
So there were there were 2 husbands prior to him. And I find that, and it makes sense now that I'm educated a little bit more on 𝗀𝗏 and 𝗍𝗏. I noticed that a lot of people that are daughters of 𝗀𝗏, they become seductive without trying to be.
Yes.
And it attracts a little too much attention. And I've noticed that I had to try and be somewhat standoffish, and it kind of gives me an air of unapproachability.
Well, that is a common theme. And it's not that, all of our 𝗀𝗏 sisters, they're unable to have that interaction or approachable, but there is this essence or this energy of don't play with me, right? It is very serious in that regard, as it should be with all women, but, with them, it's a little more pronounced. And it's a method of protection, especially with all this woman went through. When you look at the Odu of 𝗀𝗏𝗃, where it speaks of the inseparable relationship between 𝗀𝗏 and her sister Oshun, right? They had a business together where the children of Oshun and 𝗀𝗏 have a predisposition towards commerce and entrepreneurship, right? 𝗀𝗏 would get the product and Oshun would sell it, being that she was a little more personable in that regard. 𝗀𝗏 was more about like, just let me do my job. But what happened was they became so prosperous that that people started noticing, and they were even getting to the point where they were thinking about burglarizing and robbing them, right? Where one day it did materialize. But recognizing how beautiful 𝗀𝗏 was, even though she was an adolescent girl, the people who were robbing and committing the crime were actually trying to take advantage of her, right? Her sister Oshun, being a little bit older, being, a fully mature woman, she offered herself as compensation rather than, them damaging, 𝗀𝗏 and her womanhood, which they accepted. And from that day forward, 𝗀𝗏, based on the fact that Oshun actually had a child from said interaction and assault, she said, I'll always protect your children and you'll always protect mine, right? You speak about, sometimes attracting too much attention, all of those things. Has there even, and it's not so much to, how do I put this? It's not a question of envy per se, but have you experienced that where it's like maybe people feel like you have too much? Maybe people feel like you moved forward too quickly, not knowing your story, obviously, of 3 decades of preparation. Have you had to interact with that, with, just that friction from the community that surrounds you sometimes with your accomplishments?
Sometimes, yes, and it causes a lot of different jealousy.
Yeah.
As it is in the human condition, a lot of people get jealous of what they don't have.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, I've always said I really don't make a habit of being jealous of anyone, not because I have everything I want per se, but because I'd be envious of their problems as well. People were looking at Oshun and 𝗀𝗏 saying, wow, those women have it made. And look at what they went through as a family. Look at the trauma, But it is interesting, ultimately, from an 𝗍𝗏 standpoint, you did arrive at a house that is Oshun ridden, whether it's my wife, whether it's my daughter, etc. There is that situation where 𝗀𝗏 and Oshun always have that interaction. I mean, what are your sentiments about Oshun up until this point? I mean, being a daughter of 𝗀𝗏, how has your interaction been with that energy or just that concept?
Well, of course, anytime you look at Oshun, of course, she's very shiny, sparkly, and very just in general beautiful. And interacting with your wife, especially, I even told her this. I watched her as she was caring for everybody in her house, and
Yes,
I told
ma'am.
her she did it so gracefully. And she made it look easy. And I feel like Oshun has a tendency to make her duties easy or make them look easy,
Yeah,
even though they're not.
sure.
And I feel like she does them with a little more grace instead of brute force, maybe like Oya.
Yeah. Oya kind of pushes through, and Oshun is a little more finesse sometimes. And, I say Poroye has had the privilege and maybe the curse of going through so many hand of ifas with me and us that, it's very textbook at this point for her. But, I'm sure she appreciated that conversation. And, when we look at Oya, we look at the fierceness of what the feminine aspect of things is. And it's interesting you mentioned that run-in you had with pneumonia when you were younger, because Oya has to do with oxygen, in all those different cases. And she's present when we're born, and she's present when we leave. So it is interesting, the near-death experiences that you've had have had to do with breathing and, exchange of oxygen and CO2. But when we look at Oya as a mother, she was very intense. There's a story in the Odu of 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗲 where her and Shango had a child, right? And it was a male in this case. And, he had these habits where he would party a little too hard, right? He'd have a little too much alcohol to ingest, and he'd start saying some arrogant things. Well, one time he told the king that he could move his palace around a tree that was growing right through the middle without destroying anything. And the king was like, wow, that's really impressive. Well, how about this? You have 3 days to do it. If you do it, you can have my crown. But if you can't do it, I decapitate you in front of everybody. And the guy was like, yeah, sure, I'll see you tomorrow. He was drunk out of his mind. The next day when he wakes up with the hangover, he's like, I don't remember yesterday. And everybody's like, man, you got a pair, man, because for you to bet that to the king, you must have something really up your sleeve. And he realized he had made a huge mistake. He went to visit the 𝗏𝗏𝗏. The 𝗏𝗏𝗏 told him to immediately go visit his parents, who were Shango and Oya, who he was actually avoiding because they had told him to stop drinking, right? Yes. So when he got over there, Shango didn't say anything. He said, I don't really care what you did. That's not my place, but you got to deal with your mother. And Oya really ripped into him. She's like, I've told you 100 times not to speak unnecessarily. You're being arrogant. I told you to be careful with vices. She really ripped him a new one, and she said, this is the last time I'm going to help you because I don't want to see you suffer, but don't ever come to me with any of this nonsense again. And Oya, by way of her wind, actually lifted the palace and moved it to the side. Okay. When the king saw this, he was like, man, I guess I owe you the crown. And the guy said, the crown is yours. I don't deserve it, but I was able to do this, so I keep my life. When we look at this story, and you almost getting struck by lightning, God forbid, do you feel like she's a stern parent?
That's an under-exaggeration.
Yeah, right?
Yes.
And other than, possibly getting struck by lightning, like, have there been other cases where you're like, okay, you're making it very clear you're not happy with what I'm doing right now, certain experiences and situations that you've had?
Dreams, sometimes very violent, or like she did with her son, a very stern talking to. She comes very clear, and there's definitely no mince of words.
Yeah.
I've also had some other experiences where she has come in dancing.
Yeah, that's definitely her, because Oya's dance is reminiscent of the tornado. Circles, noises, etc. The screaming, making her presence known and whatnot. The Yorubas say that the bellowing of the wind is what actually is what is Oya screaming as she's coming down, right? And she was very intense, and kind of even leaning back on the interaction with Shango once again. She was very intense when it came to the defense of her home, her loved ones, the people she cared about. And Shango here, her partner was actually going through a lot of situations because he was getting hit up with a lot of witchcraft. He wasn't able to go to battle. And her actually having learned all of his arts of war up until that point, she, at that point, actually donned the beard, right? 𝗀𝗏 is known as 𝗃𝗏, or the buffalo, where she, at a moment's notice, could transform into a completely different being. And one of her attributes was actually growing a beard. So when she went to battle, she dressed as Shango, and all of the soldiers were like, oh man, he's feeling better. We're off to the races, you know? And she actually handled everything for him, that by the time Shango arrived, they were like, where were you? Everything's already done, you know? So I ask you, as a woman, as a wife, as a taker of home, as an entrepreneur, you know, how does that resonate with you as far as like the protection aspect of things? Do you find yourself in a mode of protection, or being very, very fierce when it comes to protecting those that you love?
Most definitely. I will go to the ends of the earth. There's very few people that are in that position with me, but when you are, my opinion is not swayed of you.
Yeah.
I have one of my hangups, because we're talking about a lot of the good stuff. One of my hangups, I have a little bit of paranoia. With cameras, different things like that, take different aspects of security, because I feel uneasy about when I am not there. Is this protected? Are these things protected? Are my animals protected?
Yeah, 𝗀𝗏 definitely had to deal with that, especially after the situation that happened with her and her sister at said storefront that they had. So that makes a lot of sense. And then apart from that, just her overstimulation spiritually, she was constantly being utilized as a medium. You know, some people would go as far to say that 𝗀𝗏 was not only the first, but the perfect expression of mediumship. She was right in the middle. She was static electricity. She's also a river deity. She's also the river deity. The Niger River, or the 𝗃𝗏𝗹𝗁, is actually dedicated to her. So, you know, once again, kind of delving into her complexity. And, you know, to be a jack of all trades has its values and its virtues, but also for someone such as yourself, it can be a lot to deal with. You know, when you have so many things going through your mind, your body, your spirit, your soul, it can be a lot. Definitely not a position I envy, but one I definitely admire, because it's something that most people wouldn't be able to handle, you know. In the Odu of Osabara, 𝗀𝗏 was going through a tough time, because in one of her, you know, incarnations, she had just gotten divorced from Shango, you know, because he was doing a bunch of philandering, as he usually does. And she took an oath of pride to never interact or receive anything from him again. Well, one of the things that she lost was the ram, because her and Shango used to actually eat the ram together and interact on that level. But when she walked in and saw him eating it with her sister Yemaya, she said, I'm not dealing with any of you guys. It was kind of like a Jerry Springer episode,
right.
You know what I'm saying? So she's completely abandoned it and left. The issue was, though, is that she was now homeless. She was now without nourishment. She was, you know, in rags. Like, she was going through it, but she had so much pride. So one day her father, 𝗶𝗸𝗏, saw what she was going through, or at least what he saw from the outside, and he said, are you okay? She said, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, you don't look fine. She's like, don't worry, I'm fine. And he said, well, I have this situation. You know, they keep offering me a black goat. I don't like the black goat. I like to dress in white, and I want my animals to be white. Could you do me the favor of taking the black goat off my hands? I know you eat the ram with Shango and stuff like that, but do you think you could do that for me? The first thing she wanted to do was burst out crying, because, you know, her father, 𝗶𝗸𝗏, was the only one that was lending a hand to her at that moment. But she had so much pride, she was like, well, you know, it's a little bit annoying that you're asking me this, but, you know, I'll do it for you. You know, 𝗶𝗸𝗏 was like, okay. And he gave her the goat, and he ultimately saved her life. That's why till this day, 𝗶𝗸𝗏 and 𝗀𝗏 can eat together. I believe when I consulted you the first time, you mentioned a very positive masculine figure in your life. Was it your father, if I recall, or was it your grandfather?
I have many. My father and grandfather, they're definitely very positive. My father's passed, but my grandfather is still here, and it is my grandfather, my father's father.
Nice. Now, you know, first of a two-part question, how has pride played a role in your spiritual development? Is it something that was present, you've had to overcome?
Oh my goodness, yes. So when you were speaking of the story of the Odu, it definitely hits home, because I would rather be homeless on the street and hungry than begging.
Yeah.
Or making my own way. So you are 100% on that. And I feel like I share that personality.
It seems to be a common trait because the daughters of 𝗲𝗏 that I've interacted with, that I've had the pleasure of interacting with, very reserved, very no nonsense, and very private, you know. And even the ones I consult sometimes, like let's say I'll consult them 6 months ago, right? I'll read them. Easiest reading on earth. Okay, Baba, thank you for all the information. No confirmation whatsoever. They won't tell me how accurate the reading was until the next one when they overcame what they were going through.
Yes.
And I'll be like, you could have told me that then. They're like, no. We did what we had to do and we handled it. But
we got to work it out first.
We got to work it out. We got to work it out with us. You know what I'm saying? And it's respectable. It's a hard path, but it's one that has to be respected because not everybody has that fortitude. And it's a common thread with you guys.
What do we call that? The school of hard knocks?
The school of hard knocks. The hardest of knocks, yo. The hardest. But now delving into this other aspect of the question is, how important were those male role models in your life? Because as we look through 𝗲𝗏 and her relationship with 𝗶𝗸𝗏, was very profound. And it was really beautiful because 𝗶𝗸𝗏 knew what she was going through. But he always tried to preserve her and edify her to be the woman she knew she wanted to be. So I ask you, how important were those male influences with you coming up?
Well, not only did my grandfather have the church, but he was very educated. He is a very educated man. And he's the one that sent me down the path for an interest in religions in general. And they supported that. Most people would say, oh, that's silly. You should be a doctor. You should be a lawyer. You should be this. You should be that. And he said, no. If you want to do religion, if you want to be a major in religion, you need this, but you also need science. And he supported me every step of the way, and he still does, even till this day.
I love his logic because I remember when I got initiated into Ifa, one of my teachers, my elder, my yubona, 𝗿𝗲𝗍𝗲, I did Ifa in his home. And I was in the shack behind his house for 7 days. I spoke to this man for 7 straight days. And I think I learned more Ifa up until that point in those 7 days than I had in the 20 years beforehand that I had been studying. And he said something to me that still resonates with me. He said, Ifa is the only thing that's in harmony with music and science. He says it's a philosophy, it's a poetry, it has that element of entertainment, of mythology, but it's also a science because we're dealing with binary code. And, you know, the words that your grandfather said really match up with that these men, they've been, because at this point, my godfather, 𝗵𝗸𝗍𝗲, has been practicing Ifa for 30 years at a very high octane level. You know, and I can only imagine how long your grandfather's been practicing. I mean, when you look at that kind of preparation, and for both of these men in completely different disciplines to be able to say there has to be science even within this art, it's really comforting. Because you have some people out there like, no, I just feel like, you know, we're going to kill the rooster today. We're just going to kill the rooster. Well, there has to be something to corroborate that. And one thing I'd like to delve in with you is your education. You know, if you'd like to give your credentials, and that could lead to a whole other conversation, you know, as far as the degrees you have and from where.
Yes, a whole other conversation. At first I started, of course, we all start with our prerequisites.
Sure.
Our math and science.
Mine was remedial.
Yeah, yes. And, you know, they prepare us. So from there, I had started off going to a Christian university, Lee University. It was in Cleveland, Tennessee.
Nice.
So from there, after going through a certain type of divinity seminary school, so divinity is basically an umbrella term for study of world religions. So we studied everything from lack of religion, atheism, all the way up to the mainstreams. Even Ifa was actually the very first actual religion that we taught, or were taught in school, because some of the Harvard professors, where I've also attended, and received a PhD.
Wow. Dr. Kayla.
Yeah, Dr. Kayla.
Put some respect on it, yo.
We believe that most religion has started in Ifa. We believe that is our primordial soup.
Hold on. This is a little epic, you know. So you're telling me that, you know, said board of PhDs at Harvard there's multiple ones that have this concept.
We have professors and advisors. An advisor is somebody that prepares you to write your dissertations.
Yeah.
And some of them will have Egyptian studies or Judaism studies or Islamic or Abrahamic religion studies, but everybody agrees that most religious preparation and our first primordial soup is in Africa.
Now, when we talk about primordial soup, how do we define that as? 'Cause
Our beginning, our tadpole, our very spark of life, when you told the story of when 𝗟𝗏𝗃 meets with
𝗍𝗏𝗃, or the atom of light.
Yes.
Wow.
This is where it all started. And that's exactly what they taught us. In so many words.
Yeah. And I had the pleasure of interviewing another PhD. I'm so blessed to be around people of such intellect and preparation, being I'm a college dropout, you know what I'm saying? No. But 𝗃𝗏 really took over my education at that point. If there was a degree in 𝗃𝗏, I'd probably have a PhD in it within, if they would just offer it, I wish.
It is a level of study, I believe.
Oh, yeah, it's been lifelong. And but she actually talked a lot about the Jungian archetypes and, how it interacts with our psyche, the pineal gland, all of that soup of psychology. And just to hear that confirmation from you as well, and her talking about how 𝗃𝗏 has really provided a lot of those archetypes. So you're saying that, said professors as well have been able to recognize that as well.
Of course.
Wow. Why do you think that, and not to veer too much off from 𝗏𝗏, but this is too good. Why do you think that that's not as propagated? Why are not more people made aware of that? I'm sure said professors aren't hiding it. But why aren't more articles coming out about this pro-African soup?
Taboo. Mainstream religion takes over. Other Islamic or
Abrahamic.
Christianity, Abrahamic, all of our Eastern religions are normally at war, and they've been at war for such a long time. I believe that they take the spotlight because, as you know, some of the orishas, they fight amongst each other or quarrel.
Sure.
But you don't hear about them recruiting or starting wars.
It's a taboo. You
Yes.
can actually, in the 𝗍𝗏𝗃𝗍, it says that it's an absolute taboo for a 𝗵𝗏𝗍 to proselytize or to knock on a door or try to propagate. The way the person is supposed to arrive at 𝗃𝗏 is by way of hearing the 𝗵𝗏𝗍 verse 𝗃𝗏, seeing the beads. It's supposed to be a search. It's supposed to be an encounter. Because Orunmila noticed that the majority of the time, when you tried to create a mission towards, propagating your beliefs on people, one of two things happened. Either they were completely resistant or it caused a revolution. When you look at some of the greatest military conquerors in history, one thing they didn't touch was religious belief.
Right.
They left it alone. Genghis Khan did this. Alexander the Great did this because they realized you don't play with people's religion because it's one of those things. It's almost like a political view. It's one of those things that we hold so close to ourselves and we become vehemently defensive of. They left it alone. And another thing that you brought up as well that I think is worth bringing out the 𝗵𝗏𝗃 right now is that in the Odu of Osakuleya or Osagunleja or Osaugunda was where Olodumare began, and 𝗏𝗏 speaks heavily here. Actually, in the Odu of Osaugunda was where 𝗏𝗏 became known as Yansa, which means the mother of the nine or the mother of Egun, right? And in the Odu of Osakuleya was where Olodumare started feeling that divine itch for confirmation. This is God Almighty delving into spiritual representation to be able to find what resonated even with him the most. Imagine a quest, and he started experimenting with every religion, every single one. But the one that tickled his fancy the most was 𝗃𝗏, because he felt like it was most in line with what he had expressed initially. But apart from that, he noticed that all the other religions had something from 𝗃𝗏.
Yes.
So, to hear that confirmation of Odu by way of you, said professional, said academician, it's hugely comforting, just like our conversation with Dr. Rojas was, because we as African traditional, including you, religion practitioners, we're constantly left looking for that confirmation. One that I stopped looking for quite some time ago, because every now and again, divine confirmation such as this happens,
Yes.
And, what was that like? Because you are a doctor of religion, right? So what was it that drew you to 𝗃𝗏 ultimately, especially having interacted with so many beautiful systems?
Well, I'm kind of an omnist as well, which means that I have a belief that there is truth in a little bit of every religion.
Yes.
But as far as 𝗃𝗏, you hit the nail on the head. It's because nobody was trying to recruit me. Nobody was trying to tell me, you must do this or you have to do that. And as you said before, a daughter of Oya does not like being forced into certain things.
At all. At all. You can't force a tornado into a bottle, you know. And really, really epic stuff, because the average 𝗃𝗏 practitioner wouldn't know this. Like when we interviewed 𝗵𝗸𝗶𝗍𝗲, you know, it was even a shock to me to know that on the religious census of the global population, 𝗃𝗏 came in at number 6 as far as official practice rate, you know, and that's just the people who actually have declared it.
Yes.
That's not the people who are still dealing with the taboo aspect of things that are choosing to keep it to themselves, you know. So that's definitely huge. In the 𝗀𝗲𝗹𝗁 𝘃𝗏, it speaks heavily of your guardian Orisha, right? And it speaks of a situation where, unfortunately, she had a child named 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁 that she was unable to take care of. That was the unfortunate aspect of it. And ultimately, the child was abandoned. 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁 was pretty incredible. He was somewhat of a prodigy because he was born basically talking, walking, being able to defend himself, etc. And one day, 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲 ran into him and saw this kid in the middle of the street. He's like, this isn't right. And when he asked the kid, you know, who are you, you know, etc., and 𝗿𝗲𝗹𝗁 said, well, my name's 𝗿𝗲𝗹. I don't know where my mother is. And 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲 immediately took the boy off the street and started raising him, right? As time went on, Oya started feeling the regret, right, that comes sometimes with situations of adoption, and started looking for 𝗿𝗲𝗹, and she ultimately found him. But she didn't realize that who had adopted 𝗿𝗲𝗹 was her mother, 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲. So when Oya came and saw 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲 taking care of the boy, it was nothing short of a soap opera where everything kind of came out to light.
Right.
And 𝗿𝗶𝗸𝗲 completely chastised Oya for being a bad mother and all these different things. And Oya popped off too, where 𝗿𝗲𝗹 had to get in the middle and be like, hey, you're both my mothers. You know, let's have peace. At the end of the day, luckily I'm okay. I want a relationship with both of you. You know, how can we make this work? And peace ultimately came. The reason I bring up that story is because, you know, in this spiritual path, you know, whether it's Babalawo, whether it's medium, we interact with a bunch of people. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't losing people to death, it's losing people to life, right? You know, how has loss or separation been a theme in your life, and how difficult has it been to deal with? Because Oya being the goddess of the dead, basically, you know, you'd imagine she'd lose hope in investing emotionally in anybody because she knows that one day they're going to transition. You know, how have you noticed within yourself that that process affects you as far as losing somebody, whether it's to life or death?
Well, the life is a little bit harder than death.
Yeah.
The life for me is when somebody goes out of your life, either via betrayal. People move on. People have lives. They have children. They get mortgages. They get married. And as long as there is some kind of form of contact, I feel as if you never truly lose that person. Social media has made it very easy to kind of keep up with this. But betrayals, I believe, hit daughters of Oya even harder than anything else. Say a friend double crosses you, or something happens and they're unable to communicate.
Like Shango. Shango slept with her sister.
Yes.
Good Lord, you know?
And it's like hell on earth.
Yeah, here we go again, you know?
Yes. And then that's when that temper comes out.
Yeah.
And that calm reserve that you spoke of in the privacy of the daughters of Oya, that's all goes out the window.
Yeah, I mean, you know, she had her way of dealing with pain, and that's why Shango was really terrified of her, because it actually led to a point where, you know, Oya really, you know, she threw out the rule book. She says, I'm going to throw witchcraft at you. I'm going to curse you. You know, you're going to feel my wrath, to the point where he had to get back with her. You know what I'm saying? He says, I'd rather not have you as an enemy. I'd rather have you as an ally, at least within my home. So I won't be doing that again. So pretty common in that regard. Well, yeah, she was a real feminist of her time. And I say feminism in the most positive way.
Mm-hmm.
She believed that they were equal. She believed that anything a man could do to a certain degree, I can do, you know, as far as effort-based activities.
Mm-hmm.
And you really see that, you know, whether it's her being a warrior or her in this next story of 𝗹𝗶𝗸𝗶𝗍. Because in that sign was where the male orishas left to go to war. And she was left with her father, Olofin, right? Or God.
Yes.
And she was taking care of him. She was fulfilling all of her daughterly roles. But, you know, as men do, we don't think a lot before we leave, and they didn't leave enough provisions for them to get through a long war process.
Mm-hmm.
So Olofin started going hungry, right? 𝗲𝗶𝗸𝗶, being raised amongst men, she knew exactly how to hunt, prepare food, everything that you could think of.
Same.
And it seems like you come from a masculine background in that regard where you learn those things as well. And she went to her father one day and said, hey, if you allow me, I'll be able to feed you. And he said, you know, there's a huge taboo on women sacrificing. And she says, I know, but at the end of the day, you need to eat. So either you let me kill a chicken or you're out of here. So his tummy rumbled one more time and he said, do what you got to do. And she went and she did amazing. She fed him. She brought him back. She was able to feed the people. And ironically, right after that success, the men came home, as the story said. You know, they were like, oh, we were almost here. And she was like, of course you were. But she literally saved the day. And that is 𝗲𝗷𝗄's theme. Like, she's constantly coming through. She is the epitome of dependability. When I think of the buffalo, I think that, you know, it's just sturdy, it's stoic, and it just makes things happen. So I ask you, how important was it fulfilling those roles to your family? Or, you know, living up to that expectation of all these wonderful men that raised you?
Well, it's definitely big shoes to fill.
Yeah.
I should say. But them being nurturing, my father making me capable. He was not a spiritual leader, but he was a man of faith.
Nice.
But he did teach all of those things. Hunting. I can change oil in my car. I'm very
can't even do
capable.
that.
Yeah, I'm very capable.
Can't do none of that.
So that doesn't mean I always do it.
Of course not, but you know how.
But I know how.
Yeah.
If I had to. So as you mentioned, I always talk about my husband. Well, he got very sick for a couple of months, and I had to take care of a lot of different things. Of course, he still did some things, but he was ultimately told, you have to stay down. So therefore, like the story you just told, I had to take over and take care of some things that normally was his responsibility, and I had no problem doing it.
And that's the beautiful thing about the movement of women empowerment, female empowerment, because, you know, I always say a man is only as strong as the woman he has by his side. As you recognize with my wife, or I'm sure as your husband was able to recognize in you, where would we be without that feminine presence? I mean, have you always had that, I won't say chip on your shoulder, because you it was never denied to you, but have you always had that, hey, I am man and woman. I am a being. I am a human. There's no reason I'm not going to be able to assist said person through this, or myself.
Yes, and I'm extremely hard to control.
Okay, the buffalo.
When it comes to control, and the way that I joke around all the time with people, and I say, if you tell me to do something, even though I was going to do it, I'll do the opposite just to prove to you that I don't have to do as you say.
Very common. Extremely common. But that makes sense, and you being able to fulfill those roles, it really was 𝗲𝗷𝗄's whole thing. She says, I have to be on par. I have to be respected. And she really gained that respect. She's the only woman in the history of all Afro-Indigenous faiths that was able to get the green light to sacrifice from God himself. Only case, you know. I will say, when you look at the Odu of Ogun, it speaks of, you know, a situation where 𝗲𝗷 was having difficulties once again with Shango. This is a very consistent thing. And whether it's in the New World or in Africa, these two beings are really inseparable, to the point where when you initiate in Africa, just like here, they really highly recommend, if you're a child of Shango or 𝗲𝗷, that you receive the opposite deity. Mm-hmm. Like in your case, or if a child of Shango was to crown, to receive 𝗲𝗷, because they were perfect for each other in all the wrong ways. You know? So one day they were having issues again. And 𝗲𝗷 at the time, you know, being on her mode, she was running around with a machete. Now, mind you, it was a little too large for her to be able to maneuver. So Shango would beat her up, you know. And the same thing was happening to Ogun, but the issue was Ogun had a small dagger. So he was too big to be able to maneuver it. Shango would take advantage of him. One day, Ogun and 𝗀𝗏 found each other and realized they could help each other, and they decided to switch weapons, right? And the next time Shango came around, they kicked his butt real bad. You know, they handled him real good. So at that point, he decided to respect both of them and kind of change his ways. And 𝗀𝗏 and Ogun, you know, really were able to collaborate, and they actually stayed together. Whether it's with your husband, whether it's with other decent people in general, how important has it been to find that other half as you work towards your goals now?
It is definitely really important to find that other half. What you're explaining in the metaphysical world, we call those twin flames.
Nice.
Two souls that are meant to be together, but sometimes they're extremely toxic to one another, such as Bonnie and Clyde.
Yeah.
And I feel like finding your pair, whether it be a soul sister of some kind, a husband, a wife, a partner, it is always good to have somebody to complete you. And I feel as if mine keeps me a little bit grounded. He's a little bit more steady. Me, I'm fly off the handle. Sometimes I'll get angry very quickly. I have to watch that.
And that makes sense, because 𝗀𝗏 didn't want to be this way. She just wanted to have that strong male presence by her side to be able to ground her, because her biggest frustration was that, you know, I want to be a woman. Even with all of my masculinity and me being a warrior and me, you know, lightning, thunder, I want to be able to just be able to feel safe and comfortable and trusting, you know. And when she found Ogun, at least in this case, she was able to have that, right? So that was very key for her. You know, being somebody that, you know, has gone through, it seems, all of the 𝗀𝗏 stages that anyone could go through, what advice would you give to the newly revealed children of 𝗀𝗏? Because even though you just got formally revealed, you've kind of been interacting with this energy for, you know, almost a lifetime.
Yes.
You know, what would you advise to, you know, someone who received their hand of Ifa yesterday and 𝗀𝗏 came out? What would you tell these people?
Reflect. Slow down and reflect.
Wow.
And be self-aware. Because often we don't look at ourselves, or we just go after exactly what we want because we're so driven. And sometimes I feel as if maybe a daughter of 𝗀𝗏 would not understand a consequence of hurting somebody else to get what they want. Like, get out the way.
I tell you, you think of the buffalo, that's really what it is. It'll bash its head against a tree just to kill the tree, and it hurts itself.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, really having that out-of-body introspection, I guess, to be able to say, like, hey, this is what I need to do for not only the betterment of other said person, but most importantly, myself. Because I've noticed that the children of 𝗀𝗏, they have a tendency of putting others before them. And most people wouldn't expect that, because, you know, they look at her and they see her by herself most of the time. But when you really look at 𝗀𝗏 does everything for everybody. She puts the air in our lungs. She makes sure the market is full for us to be able to consume. There's water at the river. You know, the buffalo has meat. Like, this woman is a perfect mother, a perfect woman, a perfect partner. And, you know, sometimes it really goes unrecognized. And with the podcast, I always try to show the other side of the stereotype of the Orisha, you know, because whether it was with the 𝘃𝗶𝗱𝗏 episode we did or with this one, these are Orishas that don't get enough light as far as the different aspects of themselves that are explained in Odu, to be able to see their full personality, where they're like, oh yeah, she's just a pop-off, or 𝘃𝗶𝗏𝗏 is a loner and a depressive. You know, there are other aspects that we need to delve into, because it's only going to make their children's lives easier by understanding them, you know. And what would you say to those people out there that are trying to interact with a child of 𝗀𝗏 that aren't having much luck? You know, what could they do to have a positive interaction with people such as yourself?
Well, first of all, keeping your space. Do not touch.
Static electricity.
Asking direct questions. Say what you mean that is on your mind, because I guarantee you we're able to read what's on your mind.
Even before you say it.
Even before you say it.
Don't play with me.
There are times my husband will come rushing into the house. I can't find it's here in the red cabinet in the black bag under the. You didn't even see it. Just go look.
It's there, man. You know, and that's why we need you guys. Where would we be? You know, and we really went over themes like that in the 𝗹𝗶𝗶𝗶 video, because I'm so happy you mentioned your interaction with 𝗃𝗶𝗶𝗶, my wife, because when you actually see what these women go through during the ceremony and what they're doing and how important their role is, it gives people a whole nother idea. It's not just the lady serving the table. That's like a complete undermining of the whole process, you know, everything that goes into it, because we're stuck in a room, you know, we're here working, we're doing our thing in here. Like the whole flow of the ceremony is completely dependent upon the woman. And 𝗀𝗏 was a good 𝗃𝗶𝗸𝗶 as well. That was another thing, you know, back in the days, there was this stereotype, no, the daughters of 𝗀𝗏 don't serve the table. I couldn't imagine anything more far-fetched, because if you look at how she literally fed God Almighty, how could she not feed Orula and his sons? So another female Orisha that's very linked to Ifa. Dr. Kayla. It's been a wonderful interaction. I really want to bring things full circle and ask you, you know, any final thoughts, any comments you'd like to make, or, you know, tell people what's next with you and your establishment. If you'd please mention it, etc.
Well, hopefully it continues to grow and do exactly what it's meant to do. I know this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
I know this is what you're supposed to do. You're exactly where it needs to be. And the one thing I would suggest is seek a teacher. If you keep seeing 𝗀𝗏, if you're feeling some type of a presence, and not just with her, because no Orisha should be undermined no matter who they are.
Yes.
That's a big mistake. And I feel that you should seek out a competent teacher. Start reading, start learning, and of course, go through your videos, your podcasts, everything that you have. You have a well of information here that somebody could listen to. I have students, and even my employees are your fans, and they listen to your stuff all day long.
Well, they definitely humble me. Every photo, every interaction, it's so nice to meet really nice people. I say, you know, when I first got into Ifa, one of the things I asked for, besides good teachers and sound wisdom, was for Orumila to surround me with decent, you know, wholesome people, and he's really done that. In my opinion, his hand went loose. He gave me a little too much than, you know, I expected, but he's been too kind to me. And they're ultimately too kind to us, because as we grow, we learn more about them, we delve more into them, and we reap all those benefits. So for, like you said, for anybody that's interested, for anybody that's trying to grow, find that mentorship, find that guidance, because there are decent people within this spirituality.
And choose wisely.
Absolutely. It's an important decision, and it can really affect how things are going to go from that point forward. But once again, I want to thank you so much. Wonderful interaction. I think we did 𝗀𝗏 justice, and you were able to show aspects of her personality in real life that people may not have seen before or were looking for confirmation on. So for that, you having the courage to be able to sit here and talk about it, sincerest thanks.
Well, thank you for having me, and good luck to you.
May Orumila bless you.
Thank you.
Family, couple things I want to get into before we disconnect from this wonderful interaction. BotanicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running. Consultations of any sort, products, mentorship programs, all of these things can be solicited on the website. The podcast is available on all major platforms as well. If you haven't had the opportunity, please tap on the like button. Be sure to share, comment, and subscribe. And from all of us here at Our Roots Podcast, thank you. And until next time, see the light.